Hello, everyone. Welcome to my first official, I guess we'll call this a podcast. Is that what we're going to call it? Anyways, this is Jekyll, and this is the first recording concerning a discussion of the lore of Erosia, or Erosia, however you want to say it. Pronunciation, unless you terribly botch it, is not really a big thing for me. Um, so I posted in the discussion forum that I am happy to do some lore discussion videos. And by videos, I really just mean voice recordings because I ain't about that getting in front of a camera live. um, in that actual discussion thread, feel free to post your questions. Or make queries about topics that you're curious about. And over time, I will do my best to create recordings discussing them on a little bit of a more in-depth founder sort of level. Uh, so let's begin. Today, I'm going to be talking about the Dragontouched because they're a bit of a hot topic and everyone's excited about them. I'm glad everyone is excited about them. I love them. Why? Because I love dragons. Dragons are awesome. So where did they come from? What was my thinking in creating them? Well, um, when I was sitting down and drafting concepts for the world of Erosia, and I included dragons. I mean, the world was created by the dragon gods, who then proceeded to create the dragon flights. I obviously knew that people would be hardcore interested in the dragons, or at least there would be people who are interested in dragons, because I know I certainly am. And with dragons in the world of Erosia being shapeshifters, um, they're able to take on the form of any of the mortal races once they reach a certain age. That left the door open for relationships between mortals and dragons to form, as is natural, or, well, not natural, as one might expect. Um, so, with that door being opened, it kind of I dug up a little bit of a rabbit hole and I just kept following it down, and the concept of the Dragontouched were born. And I will say, I looked into source material from the Elder Scrolls universe and even Dungeons and Dragons about like their Dragonborn and some of the worlds where you have things like Dragon Marks, I believe, and that's like the Sword Coast Adventure uh, campaign setting, and of course, as I said, Elder Scrolls, and like you've got the Septim Dynasty and the Dragonborn, who are born not with the blood of a dragon, but the soul of a dragon. And sort of the lore surrounding all of that. And I read some of this stuff, and I looked into it, and I uh, thought on it, and that's really kind of how I shaped the mindsets of some of the dragon flights of all 10 varieties. So that is sort of kind of the background of where Dragontouched as a concept came from. Um, but what actually are the Dragontouched? What are they? What are they to the common person in Erosia? Well, the simplest answer to that question is the average person has virtually no idea what a Dragontouched is. Like, the term carries with it a different connotation than you might expect. To an average person in Erosia, the term Dragontouched carries with it the connotation that someone has simply been blessed in some way, shape, or form, either by a dragon or the gods or an immortal. Um, Throughout history, most people have used the term to refer to ordinary men or women who have simply done extraordinary things, so as to imply they're favored in some way. The knowledge that they are actually blood related to a dragon or a god is not common at all. To more educated people, dragon touched as a term takes on a different meaning. The suspicion that these kinds of people, these people who are blood related to dragons and the immortals and the gods, it starts to arise the further down the rabbit hole you go. Like the more you actually start in-game researching and looking into that stuff, the more the suspicion that this is more than just a title starts to form in the back of your mind. Um, but for the most part, they're still figures that only crop up sporadically throughout history. Typically, it would take years of dedicated study about dragons, the gods, the immortals, and dragon-touched mythology in general to get a clear idea of what they are and what they can do. And even then, it would take a while before the distinction between a high-born dragon touched and a low-born dragon touched would form. Without that, even more educated people wouldn't really discern the difference because it's subtle and it's subtle on purpose. Um, so s- um, so with that in mind, understand that dragon touched the term throughout history bears more the idea behind it that you're just someone who is a champion of some great cause who has like the strength or fortitude or power of a dragon, or you are patroned by a dragon, or there's a god that has served as the patron of your cause or line, and they favor you highly. No, very, very few people really cling to the suspicion that there's more behind that. And in some cases, they're right. Um, as I develop and get off my butt and actually start releasing the world's history and whatnot, there probably will be figures who crop up in Erosa's history who have been referred to as dragon touched so and so, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are dragon touched in the truest sense of the word. And that's done on purpose to obscure the lore in terms of in game connotation so that it is difficult to make the distinction, so that people are under the impression that it's not, that its true meaning or that it has a truer meaning than they would initially suspect. So anyways, there are two types of dragon touched, the lowborn and the highborn. I'm going to start with the lowborn. What is a lowborn? Well, a lowborn dragon touched are those men and women who are descended of a mortal dragon. Well, what's a mortal dragon? You have the dragon gods, and then you have the demigods and the immortals. Technically speaking, the demigods and the immortals can take on dragon form, and obviously the dragon gods can as well. Um, but they're not dragons in the sense that a mortal would understand them, because they can shift and change their appearance and their very fabric of their being at will because they're divine powers. Mortal dragons can only shift to different mortal forms, and typically they only do it in accordance to the races that populate the areas they frequent. And with that being said, they can only do it when they reach a certain age. They are not immortal, they are not invulnerable, although they are extremely powerful as they get older. Um, they will still die, they are still susceptible to disease. Um, they can be, if particularly skilled individuals gather together, they can slay a dragon. Um, and dragon slayers do exist in the world of Erosia. Um, whereas that's not quite something that's easily accomplished or possible when facing a god. So the mortal dragons were created by the gods, but they're not directly descended from them, if that makes sense. So yeah, a low-born Dragontouched was born of a mortal dragon. They're born as a result of the mortal dragon taking on the form of one of the many races and engaging in a romantic or sexual relationship with another mortal. Typically, it's romantic because dragons, they're not really into the whole, oh, let's just do a one night stand here thing. No, they tend to form very strong attachments. um, and the thing about lowborn is that while the immediate children of that coupling are born a lowborn Dragontouched, not every generation that follows that will have a Dragontouched child in it. The further away you get from the point of origin with a lowborn, the less likely it is that Dragontouched are going to spring up until you've got generations and generations and generations down the line, and it's happening so infrequently that it's more or less assumed that the power of the dragon has just been thinned out due to age. And while it's still possible for that Dragontouched heritage to manifest, it becomes less and less likely the further away you get. Um, and on that note, I've had a couple people ask me, well, why don't you just go with like making half dragons or like Dragonborn in the D&D um, sense of the word, where you have a humanoid with draconic features? Well, I don't really like that, and the reasoning doesn't really go beyond me just not liking that. So I decided you will have dragon-blooded people, um, but they will not have draconic features because I don't like that. And that's about the only reasoning behind it. um, another thing about the lowborn Dragontouched is they do not have access to the legacy gift. That is something that only proper dragons and highborn Dragontouched have access to. And there are other ways for normal people to get access to those sorts of gifts, but we haven't opened up those avenues or really started exploring and fleshing those avenues out yet. That's something that's not going to be released for a little while. There are other priorities, but there eventually will be ways that people can explore, perhaps getting access to a legacy gift that goes beyond being a Dragontouched, but they would be extraordinary circumstances. Lowborn Dragontouched can bear rune magic, um, up to a maximum of 3 disciplines, period. So that is something that I think people should keep in mind when looking at them and trying to make a distinction, because rune magic is freaking cool, if I do say so myself. The second variety of Dragontouched that you have are highborn, and these are the men and women who are descended of the gods. Specifically, highborn Dragontouched are children of the immortals. Um, when a god takes or physically manifests in the world and lies with another mortal, the first child or children, if it's like twins or triplets or something, they are immortals. They are what you would expect with the traditional sense of what a demigod is. Like they're half gods. They are still divine, they're immortal, they won't age, they don't fall prey to disease, etc., etc., but they're not quite as powerful as their fully divine parents. And then their children are highborn Dragontouched. So what what is that? Whether how does that work? So the thing about a highborn line is that every single member of that line is born a highborn dragon touched. Whether they are the immediate children of the immortal or someone who simply has one in their ancestry. When they're born, they are born a highborn, and their power as a dragon touched will manifest. Um, Highborn are those dragon touched who have access to the legacy gift, and they cannot bear rune magic, but they do have the power to bear a unique ability that is all their own. Typically, it is something that is related to the lineage that they are descended from, that has something to do with the ideals that their bloodline is linked to. So, in order to garner a good idea of what sort of abilities would fall within that frame of mind, it's important that you really take a look at the gods and the progenitor dragon god proper, uh, who's responsible for the creation of that line and the dragon flight associated with it. Um, how common are the dragon touched? I touched on this earlier, but the average person doesn't even really know they exist, not as a real thing. They're under the impression that it is just a fancy title that really gifted and prominent individuals throughout history have been given. They're decidedly rare, even before the Sundering. The Sundering being the cataclysmic event that shaped the world as people know it today. Even before that event, right then and there, people were still under that sort of impression, or the broader public. It's just that uncommon. Um, Most of those seen throughout history have been of the lowborn variety, um, and only a few are known to have been highborn, and that's where the distinction between the two kind of blurs. And because they're so infrequent, most people just assume that if you are a true dragon touched, then you have these gifts that have been woven into myths and legends, which is exactly how people know that they might exist. They're relegated mostly to stories, to myths, to legends, figures of great battles or great events that have transpired throughout history that were able to call dragons or had the favor of the gods in such a way as to warrant them being referred to as touched by a dragon or blessed by a god, etc., etc. They never, unless you do some serious digging and you start connecting the dots and whatnot, as an average person or even someone who just glances at some of the mythology, you really wouldn't get the impression that you're blood related to these things. So, if you make the decision to play a Dragon Touch, what is life like as a Dragon Touched? Well, it depends on which kind you play. For a lowborn, it's fairly normal, or it can be fairly normal. Lowborn Dragon Touched could spend their entire lives not knowing who and what they are because their heritage might lay dormant, only to be passed on to the next generation. When their abilities manifest, it's usually around puberty. It might be earlier, it might come later. You never know. It depends on the individual. Um, Also, it depends on how close are they to their dragon ancestor. Was it one of their parents, a grandparent, some distant name that's been lost to the fog of time? I leave that when it comes to lowborn, I leave that very much in the hands of the player to decide. Um, Lowborn have the privilege of much more freedom in not being somehow, some way, intricately bound to the ideals that pervade the dragon flights that they're born from. They are, after all, still free-thinking mortals, quite capable of making up their own minds. Um, and they don't have to, they're not as inexplicably drawn to the influence and mannerisms and ideals that the dragons that they spawn from represent. Not so much for the highborn. Uh, Highborn Dragontouched can be said to live either cursed or blessed lives, depending on how you look at it. They, for the most part, one of the benefits is they usually frequently enjoy close relationships with the deities who spawned their bloodlines. Um, that doesn't necessarily mean that the god in question is like always by their side or they constantly have conversations with them, but it might manifest as a feeling of always having someone or something looking out for you or being extraordinarily lucky or just feeling as though in a very comforting sort of way that you're never alone, that your existence is validated, if that makes sense. Or conversely, if you are spawned from one of the darker deities, you might be a pawn in some twisted purpose. And you might be struggling to get away from what seems to be a very cursed and unfortunate life that just follows you wherever you go. Highborns are drawn quite powerfully to the ideals that patron their bloodlines. They can't help it. It's part of who they are. There's just something inside of them that pushes them towards whatever it is that the deity and the immortal and the dragon god who spawned their bloodline um, represent. They can't, it's unavoidable for them. Somehow, some way, it will be a facet of their life to lesser or greater extent, for better or worse. Uh, and also, while there are exceptions, it is absurdly rare for bloodlines of highborn dragon touch to be widely known. And even those are mostly, they simply carry the connotation that this particular family is beloved and blessed by the gods. Um, Not that they're directly related to them. Usually that sort of thing is kept on the DL, the down low. Uh, and there's a reason for that. It's because highborn can and often are hunted. They're used as pawns or outright killed by rivals or other powers allied against the deities that they spawn from. For instance, you have the Imperial House of Abraxas, which is the only known bloodline. Actually, it is the only platinum highborn line that has ever existed. Um, for a long time, they were patrons of truth, of justice, of hope. They helped forge the Ilosian Empire. Well, they didn't do that without consequence. It was known that they were of the blood of Arcus, who is the demigod of truth, hope, and justice. And because of that, they faced a lot of trouble, constantly having to fight off darker powers that are trying to undermine everything they do at every turn. But at the same time, they have the reassurance that Arcus and even Icon, who is the Dragon King, is with them, stands by their side, and will help them through whatever it is, whatever challenge that they face, and will help lift them up through those challenges. But because of that, the challenges that they do face are that much greater. And because it is known that they are from that line, they always had to deal with the fact that uh, servants of the Mist Lords, the Mist Cults, pointedly tried to track them down and lure them into situations where they could be killed or maneuvered to be sacrificed in some way, shape, or form to a Mist Lord or a dark god. Um, Certainly, servants of Eden, the goddess of chaos, and Malgar, the god of suffering, hate hate the House of Abraxas because of Icon's role in stripping those two deities of their status. Um, so that's sort of a reason why known bloodlines aren't really of a thing. And one of the dangers of playing a highborn, you're going to be hunted. And the gods, they know this. And most of them don't want to put their mortal children, descendants, through a life like that. Um, so, because of this, and a number of other reasons, they've always been exceptionally rare, even compared to Dragontouched, period. Um, so, just something to keep in mind. They live a life of burden, one that can be filled with glorious purpose and legendary feats, but their life will be filled with many burdens nonetheless. And what about life in general? Well, playing a Dragontouched always carries with it the burden of being someone who is inevitably going to fall under scrutiny. Once your lineage is known and it's verified, like, holy crap, this isn't just a title. This isn't just like something out of a myth. You're a real thing? Well, what are you? What can you do? What can you do for me? How can I use you? Mages might want to exploit you for their personal gain, either because they're curious about your powers or because they see you as a use for something in one of their arcane rituals or something, or to uncover lost power. And they might be very, very jealous. Rune mages have to go through excruciating lengths to master the powers at their command, whereas a Dragontouched is born with their abilities, and they don't have to suffer through many of the things that a rune mage does. So there is some envy, a lot of jealousy, resentment, and hate there. Um, Misspawn are invariably drawn to the presence of a true Dragontouched. Um, exactly why is unknown. I mean, there is a reason, but spoiler alert. Well, it's not a spoiler alert. I'm not going to tell you. Um, but yeah, a Misspawn will, when you are near, uh, they will be drawn to you. Um, this won't happen like if you're 10 miles away and there's a mist spawn 10 miles away. They're not going to just suddenly be like, oh, there's a Dragontouched in that area. No. It's like if you're in the immediate vicinity of a mist spawn, they will feel your presence and they will be drawn to it. So there's really no avoiding them. uh, when you're that close, there's really no avoiding them. It's just kind of hold your ground and hope you don't die uh, or fight. Figures of power, such as political figures, they might want to use you as a rallying point for the people, for or against. You might be something painted as, oh, well, you're the reason that the water's tainted, or you're filthy, or something. Or you are an emissary of the gods. You are a symbol that what we are doing is right and just, and whatever other reasons they can come up with. Um, to give you an example, the Ilosian Empire makes a very concentrated effort to seek out and find Dragontouched. And then, like, there's an entire division within the Imperial Inquisition that spends a significant portion of their lives searching for Dragontouched and bringing them into the fold of the Temple of Light so that they can serve the ideals of the Empire. And it takes a considerable amount of effort, a lot of time and resources to find Dragontouched, no matter what variety you're from. On a lighter note, Dragontouched have a very holy connotation. The world of Erosia was created and is overseen by dragon gods. So, Dragontouched therefore carry with them the belief that they are somehow omens or emissaries of divine will. Sometimes there is more truth to this than people may realize, or sometimes it's nothing more than superstition. It all depends on the circumstance and who is being referred to as the Dragontouched. Are they a true Dragontouched, or are they just someone who's being referred to by that title? So yeah, overall, Dragontouched are figures relegated more to myth than people who are actually considered real in the world of Erosia. And the title itself is something that carries with it more the connotation that you're just someone who's blessed, or you champion something, and some the people saw fit to just give you this title, not so much that you are blood related to dragons or the gods themselves. So yeah, just keep this in mind when you are considering making a Dragontouched. Just remember that they are rare. They have always been rare, and um, they're not something that you should enter into lightly. By all means, if you want to play one, please do. I think they're awesome. I love them. Just be cognizant of the fact that there, as Erosia as a world begins to gain more of a personality and becomes more fleshed out, there are going to be far-reaching consequences for just being what you are. So yeah, I hope this helped provide a bit more insight, and that folks continue to enjoy the world that Hyde and I are creating. And feel free to ask as many questions, provide feedback, etc., as much and as often as you want. We love it, guys. Thank you very much for all of your help, and I will talk to you in the next video or recording. Bye.